All right. So what we're going to do in the next hour is one of the most important parts of the whole year. And that's where we're going to talk about the needs statement. The needs statement is the DNA of any good company, any good medical company. It's what is the deciding factor if your company and the need you're pursuing is actually going to be successful. If there actually is a market for it, if there is a real clinical need, is there a way to implement the strategy? It's all based on one sentence. So I hope that you all had the time to read in depth section 1.3 in the biodesign textbook. Again, if you don't have the biodesign textbook by now, we need to talk seriously. I'm sure there's one or two of you that don't have it, but make sure you have it and make sure you're doing these readings, because since you haven't been in the immersion as much, I'm trying to emphasize more of the readings and more of kind of the actual methodology. And then in the next month, we'll be more in the clinic. There'll be more discussions, the observations, and the needs. So for this session, what I want to do is I want to first start by checking in with all of you to see how the observing went in the clinic. I know that a few of you were able to do it this week, so that's great that we're diving in or changing your schedule around to do that. So I want to hear about how that went and things that we could be doing better. Also update you on some ideas that we have for scheduling for coming weeks, so it's not just a couple days in advance. You'll know for hopefully 2 weeks out or so, and also ways you can rotate through different faculty. So we'll talk about all that in that section. Then I'll go over a quick video of the needs statement development according to the biodesign process, so you'll get to hear from other grad student entrepreneurs that have gone through this process, so you can kind of get an overview. And then I'll give a quick lecture on it as well. And then hopefully at the end, I was thinking, if some of you want to share some of your observations or your needs with all of us, we can write a few down and see, okay, well, how do you move from an observation, okay, is this a need, and then how do you write a needs statement, and what does that look like? Sound good? Yep. All right. So how was it? Raise your hand. Those of you that were able to do the immersion, can you just put your hands up for me so I can get an idea? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So about half of you. And that's great. That's great. And what was kind of the general feeling? I know who had the most hours of immersion? Did any of you have 8 or so? Yeah? Okay. What were your experiences? Can you just walk us through? Because I have no idea either, much less sitting most of the class.
Yeah, first of all, it was very interesting just to see a hospital from the not being a patient yourself side. Yeah. Just all the other doors open suddenly, and you get to see way more. I've actually been to the diagnostic, the IR, like the interventional, and this morning to the nuclear. So I've already seen like different aspects of it.
Oh, you're done then? You've already seen three areas.
And there's like one thing so that there's a lot of problems that are like just kind of like the hospital's like fault, or like how to explain this, like one example was they had a new machine, a new CT scanner, I think, and they couldn't install it because there was asbestos in the ceiling, and they couldn't find any company to remove the asbestos in a clinical setting. And this is just some like super weird issue, like things you could never even think of. And that's for needs finding, yeah. It's just very interesting experience to hear all their daily activities and what's going wrong from, like, it could be communication, it could be educating the patient. There's so many different aspects. It doesn't have to be a medical device or a medical solution.
Good, good. And are you seeing how it's important to think in terms of the problems and not the solutions? Maybe someone else who went, could you share a little bit more about your experiences as well? And also, how did you record, how did you document what you saw so you could remember it?
Yeah, so Sean, Justin, and I, we went yesterday to the IR at Jacobs. Yeah, I was just saying. Yeah, and I thought it was really interesting. They're really receptive and really glad to explain all the procedures they were doing. It's very procedure heavy. And then personally, we're trying to show us all the interesting and like all the new cases that they would have. But personally, I think I was most interested in what they were doing the most. Like the more routine that something was, I felt like the more there was like a chance to I don't know what the word is, but like to improve on it to affect the most. So like they were like, we have really interesting cases in the other hospital. Which hospital is that?
Cool.
Yeah, they just kept wanting to show us something that was cool, but we're like, it's okay, it's our first day, everything is cool.
Yeah, wait.
And as for IR, I think most of the needs were device based because they use a lot of devices. So for example, one that I saw was they had a catheter inserted into the bladder, but it was something called a pigtail catheter where after you insert it curls up like a pig so it doesn't come out. But there was a patient that was afraid it was going to come out, so she had to go, he or she, I forgot, had to go like under anesthesia, remove that catheter and put it on a different one with a balloon. And so if that pigtail catheter, or if a new design catheter didn't have the trouble of falling out in the first place, she wouldn't have to go through that, right?
Right,
Yeah.
based on the solution of the catheter.
Yeah.
Right, because it could be something else, depending on where you see the need at, but that's a good example. Any difficulties either working with it sounds like the clinicians were very welcoming and attentive and
I guess in general, for people who haven't gone, if you're curious, the schedule is not, like you don't have to be, they don't care if you're exactly there, I want to hug back, they're busier than you are. So just be flexible, like at some point they'll say, we're done for today, or I'm sorry, I'm going to be an hour late, and I think you should just be okay with that.
Also, you can just get their phone number once you get to
Yeah,
know them and just
like
ask.
I shot out
whenever
email
it's
and
fine
he
to-
was like, by the way, we're coming at 1:15. He was like, great, we'll see you, or we'll see you at this time instead. Just text me when you get there. So just be flexible.
Okay.
It's not gonna be it's not class.
And
They're not searching for
Yeah.
you. You don't show up with problems.
And
They care.
besides the actual physician that you contacted to follow, all the physicians there are like more than happy to take you through what they're doing. So you don't have to follow that one guy if he's like busy doing paperwork. You know, just wander around.
So that's good to know in the sense of to try to get everyone in quicker.
Yeah.
I think we want to be more methodical once we have everyone in and kind of feeling comfortable with the different clinicians, because we obviously do want to have some structure to it. And Goroff and the leadership team and along with the clinicians, trying to figure out the best approach. If it's a team of or a pair following one clinician for 2 weeks, or if it makes sense to do maybe not as much tied to one clinician but tied to one department area. Maybe it's a certain area of IR, and so you visit a couple of clinicians. But if it's also, I need to go in and drop in and see myself, right? So I just want to see how collaborative it is and how easy it makes sense for you guys to shadow. But what I don't want to happen is there not to be clear expectations if the other clinicians are kind of wondering, it's one thing if you work with them for a little bit, but we just want to make sure everyone's aligned on expectations and they know what Blue LINC is about, and this type of thing. So
it seemed like they didn't mind and they were flexible from their end, but there was someone who asked, "Oh, are you supposed to be following one of?" Like they were more concerned that they weren't doing what you wanted them to do. So maybe there's something new there. But
Okay.
They all taught us like the whole procedure.
yeah.
Gordon, if you want.
What's that?
Oh, I didn't know if you wanted to comment on it.
No, unless you want me to say something.
So I actually went in today and then tried to find Andrew Purcell.
Yes.
Yeah, so then, but actually like he wasn't expecting anyone on Wednesday because he has clinics on
Okay.
Wednesdays. So then he kind of just like left me there. He told me he's going to clinics and he just left me there and then I just like followed everyone around.
Okay.
And I just floated like there and here and like talked to people.
And that worked
It
okay.
was perfect. Like people were so friendly, they wanted to talk to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't plan, I haven't experienced that type of clinical environment myself, but it sounds like radiology maybe
Like
more
I've
open to
observed
that.
surgery before and it's very different because you don't need to scrub in, they're not really regulating people, they were very, you can walk inside the back, put your hands behind your back, you don't have to wear gloves.
surgery? You don't scrub? But
No, in
No,
surgery you do,
we all
but in
went through
IR
a
you
lot.
didn't, yeah. Because they don't consider it a full-on surgery, right, it's a procedure.
You wear
Sure.
scrubs, but not like the whole like.
Right, so
Right,
you don't have
you're-
to scrub in,
Yeah.
you don't have to wear gloves, yeah.
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 Okay,
So
and, but that's through IR, right? I'm just
through
saying
IR,
that.
this is just through IR,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, and so what we're doing now is, Goroff and the leadership team, we had a call last night to basically get in touch with the different clinicians that are on the immersion schedule. With each of them has a assistant for their scheduling, and so the idea is that the assistant could just update the schedule. You know, I guess every week there's a new schedule that comes out, and so that way, if we wanted to go with a particular surgeon, say you want to continue to learn more from the radiologist from a particular one, it's more fascinating, then you would know their schedule, you know, at least a week out, and hopefully it would be accurate. Sorry about that. Not sure what happened there. Does that make sense? So we're going to try to refine this process a little bit more. Now, how does doing the immersion between kind of work hours from 8 to 6 or 7, how does that work for each of you? I know there's kind of we have a special case with just job hours, but we'll do our best to work around that. So does that work for most people? Normal kind of business hours, if you will. And do you think each of you can commit to doing either a morning or an afternoon session, basically 2 sessions a week, either morning, afternoon? You could knock it all out in one day, but maybe it's a little better to just switch it up, right? To make sure you can take everything in. Yeah.
For how long?
We ideally 4 hours.
No, I mean,
How many weeks?
how many weeks? Because obviously once the fall quarter starts, things get a bit different.
Sure. So we're really shooting for 2 months of immersion. So this was the first week that started, but we can be a little bit more flexible with people's time. And also when the fall quarter starts, we're going to have to double check with this time as well, because I don't think. Do you all know your schedule yet for the fall? Would this be in conflict with some of your classes? No?
The Wednesday evening.
This Wednesday evening. Okay, good. All right, that's awesome. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about that a little bit later. Let me just see how the alignment of the immersion is with the fall quarter coming up. Yes.
I was just wondering, because I guess they also go to the hospital sometimes on the weekend. I wouldn't mind doing one morning in the weekend or something during the full quarter if I need to, because I know that I'll be available. There's
Yep.
if they're available also.
I'm really glad you brought that up. We were talking about this earlier. I'm also going to reach out to discuss weekend opportunities, and also I think as you get to know these clinicians more, I think they're going to be more willing, if they're moonlighting or if they're doing a certain procedure over the weekend, to have you come in. Yep.
I think if I could echo that, all these procedures we're going to see are all scheduled and they're planned. Seeing some of the chapters in the book, and one of the things I think we could benefit from, I mean, it's good we have clinical immersion itself, but you mentioned weekend, and I think emergency cases, and they do have them in radiology, stroke codes, and they have to do straight CT angiograms, etc. So if we could get exposure to that, it would work.
Sure. So you're staying in a different area of the hospital.
Maybe if we could station for emergency and then just, it's sad, but hope for a stroke code or something.
Yeah. Well, or just hope to see different clinical needs. So absolutely. So just so you know, as a program, we're not tied into radiology in some special way. I've seen it happen before where you're working with a radiologist and they're talking to a cardiologist, and you find that the need is specifically a cardiac related need, and you go and you convince your team and us that this is really where the need is, and you can run down that path. The nice thing about radiology is we're trying to build a community so that you can move things quicker when you have the resources and the clinical folks. But so my long-winded way of answering this is saying, go for it. Like, if we can help open up more doors to whatever parts of the clinic, within reason, we still want to be focused within radiology for the most part. But I would consider what you're saying, if you're looking for radiology type of procedures in the ER, to be completely valid. So maybe as we get a little more advanced in the clinical immersion, reach back out to me. Or if you have contacts, if any of you have contacts directly with clinicians, feel free to shadow directly with them. You don't need to go through us. All right. Okay. So I'm going to switch gears here, and we're going to play a quick video on the need statement process from biodesign, and then I'll go into this quick little talk.
Needs finding is really about exploration.
You
It's
hear that?
really about going out there and seeing where the problems are.
I would say any innovator who's going into needs finding needs to go in with a very open mind, and open eyes and open ears.
The key step to finding a good need is really to observe it firsthand. You can't just do secondary research like reading from the literature or papers. It's not gonna work. You have to actually be on the scene.
We spent 4 weeks with our observations.
We did our clinical observations in all different kinds of settings. We first went to the operating room because that's always the most interesting place, especially for me because I'm a surgeon.
I'm a mechanical engineer, I've never seen surgery. I was actually afraid that I'll be grossed out. We observed treatment of patients in the emergency department where they were brought
We
in.
went to dialysis centers because we were doing nephrology. We went to the ward. We accompanied the team on morning rounds. We found out that there were a lot of needs happening in the clinic.
Dr. Eisenberg.
Nice to meet you.
How are you?
Personally, I like the clinics.
I know like almost all these people in this video.
Learned a lot about how inefficient healthcare delivery is, and as a consumer of healthcare, you're very often oblivious to what actually happens behind those closed doors.
You want to go ahead and schedule an appointment.
The most challenging thing was not knowing at all what was going on sometimes. You have to find the right balance between asking questions and also just kind of soaking it all in.
In terms of the stakeholders we spoke with, initially it was the doctors. We tried to set up appointments with them and met extensively with them, but realized a lot of decisions get made outside of doctors' offices.
Oftentimes the doctors are sort of the captain of the ship, but they don't necessarily know all the little things that might be going wrong.
So met with residents, met with nurses, and learned that there are probably 10, 15 different kinds of nurses, and each one has a very different opinion. We met with hospital administrators, people making decisions about purchasing products for the hospital.
We talk to the janitor and see what the problem for cleaning up the OR, things like that.
Remember that for patients and providers both, what they think may not be the same as what they say, and for sure what they say is not the same as what they do. So don't just interview, get in and observe.
Once you have observations listed, you try to see what all problems in that observations are. So in one observation there could be many problems.
Converting an observation into a need involves a lot of empathy, where you need to identify the pain point.
Theoretically, a good need statement has a very clearly defined problem, a very clearly defined population, and a clearly defined outcome.
The nuts and bolts of putting these need statements together.
That's key.
It's actually not so easy.
So in crafting need statements, I think we start out with really crude observations. We wouldn't put in a lot of thought into the who and the outcome. And we started to further refine and validate some of those problems. We started understanding the problem and who the stakeholders were and what change we were trying to make within the system.
The need statement process is iterative. You should expect it to actually last a long time as you learn more information and do more diligence in the area.
If there's one thing to know about the biodesign process, here's the mantra. A well-characterized need is the DNA of a good invention. So what you're doing in stage one, collecting those needs, it's critical. It's the start of getting that one good need that's going to lead to a great innovation.
All right. On that last note, Dr. Polyak, I actually met with him yesterday and updated him all about LINC and what we're doing down here with the leadership team and everyone involved. And he's really excited to see what comes out of this. So, one more time.
The process of taking this broad lip, very.
All right. So I'll go ahead into this brief little talk, but the real importance is on understanding what a needs statement is. All right. So this is where we're at in the biodesign textbook. Hopefully you've read 1.2, which is really the observation and the problem. So there's a really good section in there about how to do clinical immersion, how to observe, how to take notes, how to write down those problems. And 1.3 is actually all about the needs statement, which is what we're going to go over right now. And to show you where we're headed, after you do needs finding, then you need to screen them. And so what's really cool is there's 4 different key things of how you screen a need. And it's based on the disease state, it's based on the treatment options that are out there, it's about the stakeholder analysis and the flow of care. How does everything evolve in the whole ecosystem around a product or a problem? And then the 4th is the market analysis. So that'll help you filter things further. We're not going to go over these today, but I just want to give you an idea for what's next in the process. So the nuts and bolts. So everything breaks down to this slide. Once you have your observation, say you've observed a stroke patient in the ER, maybe the observation is they're in pain. The problem is maybe because they're in pain because of a certain type of stroke at a certain time is happening and causing that pain. And a needs statement is different than a problem. A needs statement ties in a problem with an outcome. So you would need to say something to the extent of a better way to treat the stroke victim to reduce his or her pain by 50%, right? I'm just making this up. But it's the whole idea that you have a problem where, oh, this is a problem, but you actually tie it into a population, which they said on the biodesign video, which is the stroke patient, or maybe a certain age of stroke patients when you get very targeted. And then you combine it with the outcome. And you say it's pain and it's reducing the pain by 50%. But then you start digging in and you're like, well, how do you measure pain, right? How is that measured? Okay, maybe pain isn't the best outcome. Maybe it's in, okay, the real need is actually in how does the patient become rehabilitated as quick as possible? So then maybe number of days in the hospital. But then, so that's kind of the cycle you go through with how do you get to the essence of what the real problem is, who the real participant is, and what that outcome is, and can that outcome be hit? So this is what you're doing right now. You're observing patient care, seeking care, receiving care, recovering from care. So these are all areas along the spectrum. And you really need to ask questions to, why is the patient here? What's happening with the key stakeholders? Remember that when you look at any problem, you have to look at the whole environment. It's not just the doctor, it's not just the nurse. It's the payer, it's the provider, it's the, FDA in a sense that reimburses, or not reimburses, approves drugs. It's, it's multiple things in the course of the business. So always be aware that just because a doctor, in particular, just because a doctor, you think a doctor will use it, don't assume that at all. In fact, they probably won't use it if they lose money. And the truth is a lot of new innovative technologies will take money out of their pocket. So that just comes down to really understanding, okay, maybe I don't want to pitch this to, that's how interventional radiology came up, right? It was primarily cardiologists that were doing procedures in the heart, and interventional radiologists were able to kind of be a younger breed, and they took on a lot more new cardiac procedures that the cardiologists wouldn't take up because they were doing more open heart, open types of procedures. So that's just an example of, if you would have not understood the market and the stakeholder situation there, you would have never gotten your business off the ground. And that's exactly what we're talking about with competing outcomes. So there could be other incentives or factors at play. Maybe they have brand loyalty. They love to use the Medtronic stent. They love it could be as silly as they like to go to some travel conference, or you just never know what those incentives are unless you really kind of consider what the different outcomes are. So again, going from problem to outcome. So the need statement addresses a specific problem. Solutions for the problem will be evaluated by a change in outcome, and the outcomes need to be measured objectively. So it's really to the point that you need to have such a strong outcome measure that if you know, say that pain reduced by 50%, if you know you hit that pain reduced by 50% on your prototype or in a clinical study, you know that you just hit the gold mine in terms of, you've crossed that box that you have a solution that matters, and also a full business plan that you can use to take to market. So it's basically, you de-risk, in biodesign you de-risk everything in the upfront, right? And then if you can get the need statement with the right outcome and check that box, then you can really skyrocket.
Garrett?
Yes?
How do you decide what that outcome's going to be? Was that, the 50%, is that something that's random, or do you do some research on that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so it can start out kind of random, or as a placeholder. What I'd like to do, if it's a certain percentage of something, and actually it leads into the next slide here, I'll write something by X%. Pain is a really poor indicator, so I shouldn't be using it. I was just using it because that's something we all can relate to in some way. So other desired outcomes are, say you want to improve clinical efficacy. Well, how do you improve clinical efficacy? So instead of writing, maybe the first round of a need statement, you'll write, I want to improve clinical efficacy. And then you'll realize, oh, actually, I want to improve the treatment success rates in clinical trials. So do you see how that's just much more quantitative? And then it would set you up for, I need to read a whole bunch of clinical trial reports, see where this current state of affair is, see if I beat it by this amount, will this cause new adoption? So that's going to be a lot of work to do that. But that number is what's going to determine your success. Someone else, you want to kind of read some of these for me? Increase patient safety, and then what that means if we just go down line by line. Derek, do you mind just reading increase patient safety, what that causes?
I would love to.
Yeah,
so increased patient safety is measured by the rate of adverse events in clinical trials. Another desired outcome would be reduced costs, measured by total cost of procedure relative to the available alternatives. The next desired outcome would be improved physician or facility productivity. That can be measured by time and resources required to perform the procedure. Another outcome is improved physician ease of use. That can be measured by solution of complex workarounds and or the simplification of workflow. There's improved patient convenience, measured by the frequency and occurrence of required treatment, change in the treatment venue, such as the inpatient versus outpatient, physician's office versus home, etc. And the final desired outcome would be accelerated patient recovery, and that would be measured by the length of hospital stay, recovery period, and or the days out of work.
So what do you think of these differences between the desired outcomes and as measured by Alex?
Qualitative, quantitative.
Right. So it really becomes much more granular, and so when you're going through your need statements or your needs, try to get as quick as possible to something that you can actually measure, even if you don't know, say, what the time would be in order to improve facility productivity. You may not know that, but you see, oh my gosh, they're in the operating room for so long, if we can improve the timing there. Because that's actually something solid that can be measured and probably turned into dollars. So I don't have time to really emphasize each point. I could probably give a case for each. One of my favorites is, improved patient convenience when you can change the treatment venue. So whenever you can bring something from the more invasive, the more surgical, the more expensive it's going to be, whenever you can bring it, I believe they did this with LASIK and other procedures, maybe not LASIK, but other laser eye surgeries where it was much more invasive, and then they've been able to move it into more of a outpatient type of setting. So that's going to really upset maybe the specialists in the field, but then it opens up a whole nother market. So That's kind of one of my favorites that I think it's ripe for innovation, especially with all the costs right now in the health system and bringing cost out of it. But please really, when we get these uploaded, really look over these and use them for your needs. Yeah, the need statement is one sentence. Only one sentence, but one very complex sentence that you're going to learn. You focus on the goal or the endpoint, so not the problem. So you do have a problem that's in there that you're trying to address, but in reality, you're trying to go after a certain goal, which is that quantifiable outcome. And this is important, do not reference solutions in your need statement. So I think we had I know we had an example of a sternotomy device, I think. And do you remember that? The device that opens up the chest? And I think some of the solutions were basically saying like, a better way to have a sternotomy device, that's safe and efficient or something like that. And yeah, that's great, but that automatically assumes that it's going to go a certain way. Same thing goes with stent. Same thing goes with a better hip implant. Well, why does it have to be a hip implant? Maybe it could be something bioresorbable or not bioresorbable, but something injectable that hardens, right? So it's the whole idea of don't reference any solution if you can into your need statement, because by default, that's limiting you. This slide is conceptually good because it shows you that as you're going from your beginner need statements to your need statement, eventually you're going to go into a written specification based on your favorite need. So when you go through clinical immersion and we help you rank your needs, you're going to come up with your top needs. And in your top needs, you're going to write a written needs spec document that basically outlines everything that you need to have in the design and everything that's nice to have in the design before you design, right? That's what's key. So you have the solution space created. My point here is to show you in this process, you're going to continue to scope down, right? That's the whole goal. You have a broad funnel and you're going to go to a very specific solution, or in this case, a need, specific need. And the validation and the level and intensity that this entails really increases as you get closer to your top needs, because you realize, okay, this is the real deal. These needs have to be good, or you don't have a leg to stand on. So last slide here, in the scoping, so there's something called need statement scoping. Did anyone read about it in the book? Can anyone share what that means, scoping? Need statement? Yeah.
Reframing the scope, so taking a need that maybe you think you could do something in the heart and then trying to expand the scope to see, well, what if it could apply as a urinary tract or in the brain, or so reframing the scope of the operation.
Yep. It's that simple and that complex, is to reframe it. So, typically you're looking at the problem in terms of many times in terms of the patient, right? You're observing the patient, what's happening to the patient, is their heart rate going up? But the problem really could be for the doctor, right? So it's something like that. And that's also in dealing with the right population that you're going after. So could this problem exist within a larger patient population? So, are you going after a very specific stroke case in the emergency room situations in adults age 45 to 63? Or are you going for the entire female stroke patient population? Could this problem exist within a subset of the patient population? So that's when you maybe have it scoped too high and you want to bring it down, because you're like, okay, this subset is still 1 million patients, right? But maybe you can't go after the 3 million patients. Could you be more specific in addressing the need? So is there a way that you can get more, in depth with a certain problem that you're trying to identify with the quantifiable outcome? And then the other way around. do you need to scope out? Could you get more broad? Because does the problem actually capture not just stroke patients, maybe it's Alzheimer's patients too, right? But then how would that change everything? So, do you have any questions on kind of need statement? What I thought we could do now is have maybe one or two of you just tee up some needs that you may have seen. They're not going to be perfect because there's no such thing as perfect, but they're going to be prototype need statements. So if maybe some of you, maybe we can do 2 needs, and then we can convert them into, try to convert them into need statements. So.
Should I just say it?
Yeah, let me write it up here.
Okay. Well, I guess the need was I watched a lumbar puncture. This is, again, very rough video, but I watched a lumbar puncture, and one thing that they did is they used this kind of barometer-like device on, like, near the spine after, like, they did an incision to measure the pressure of the CSF.
Okay.
And I was speaking to one of the radiologists, Dr. Nato, he was here last week. He's saying that information can convey like information about people's health, like the CSF pressure roughly related to other health issues.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if we could do that non-invasively without having to do like whole lumbar puncture.
Okay.
So
So what would be the problem?
the invasiveness of the lumbar puncture.
Okay. So that would be so the problem is invasive lumbar puncture. Okay. And what is it? Because it's. I mean, why is invasiveness a problem?
I think any procedure that's invasive can have complications. That doesn't seem very comfortable for the patient. They're like trying to move around. The doctor's like, don't move, and it's hard because you need like I think you need a CT scan at the same time while you're doing the lumbar puncture to make sure you're in the right region.
Okay.
And the patient moves, and like they have to move the CT scan again.
Okay.
It's just inefficient.
Sure. So move CT scan, and maybe as a whole innovative group, we could think of what the real problem is here. So what I'm hearing is there's patient discomfort. The CT scan is being moved, which is ineffective, but I guess that can relate back to patient comfort. If they have to move around a lot, is that right?
Right.
Or total time of the procedure.
Or time, okay. So, procedure time. So there's a question of if they could do this much quicker, right? What would be the outcome? If it's saving money, or if it's just the patient being more comfortable?
Reduced exposure.
Reduced exposure.
Did they talk about any complications for why a doctor or a patient would be nervous about doing this type of procedure?
They were pretty busy. Like I didn't get a chance to talk to them after. I go somewhere else to different people, but.
Well, next week.
Yeah, well, that's next week.
I think
We've got that. You can
exit.
Got it?
I think they got it on a photo, so. You've got limited white space.
We'll find you on Google anyway.
Yeah. Or Google I got.
Hashtag 360 coatings. Whiteboard your whole room.
Yeah.
So, are there any other pieces that came out? Because see how it's interesting, because you had the observation. We're hearing it and we're asking more follow-up questions, but I'm not sure if you actually saw that, right? Some of these things.
Oh, you mean why it was a problem, or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, did you think in terms of because of reduced exposure? Maybe you did.
I was thinking more just like discomfort, and anything like invasive has a risk of, infection or something of that sort.
Okay.
The patient wasn't it an old Arabic?
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah, so before that even procedure, they had to find an Arabic doctor to help get consent from the patient because it is an invasive procedure.
Oh.
And luckily
He spoke, yeah.
he spoke Arabic, so luckily, but if he wasn't there, they would have had to help translation and all of that.
Interesting.
So
So
I
I'll
think
put that as the
non-invasive-
second
Another
theme.
need, yeah.
That's another need.
Or if it's a sub-need, because it's invasive, that they need a translator, is that?
Yeah, I'm saying if it's non-invasive, you
Right.
don't need, like when you
Ah.
get blood pressure, you don't need consent, right?
It's any operation that they perform on the patient, they
Exactly.
should have consent normally.
Anything invasive, yeah.
Okay, I'll put it as a sub problem.
I do have a question.
Uh-huh.
So, how was the procedure done? They just like.
So they first numb they go with lidocaine,
Mhm.
and then they have this like needle kind of thing that they put in, and they put like a barometer on top of that.
Mhm.
But based on how high the CSF rises, that's the pressure of the CSF.
Okay, and so
then,
they had to, they couldn't insert it all, because it sounds extremely similar to what Leonard and I saw at the CT scan also, but for some different type of operation.
Uh-huh.
And they were trying to get a biopsy of somewhere around the bowels.
Uh-huh.
And they had to shove also some kind of needle, but they had to do the CT scan multiple times in a row because they, yeah, they didn't have a way of knowing exactly, like, if they had a more accurate way of knowing where the needle is, without having to do 5 CT scans in a row, it
Okay.
would already be better, and that's broadening the scope of the problem, because you could just get all the different types of biopsy that they do that way, and like they literally just looked at the angle on the computer screen and went like, that's 45 degrees we're going in. But they had no idea what was the actual angle.
Which also
And so they had to like
brings-
check 4 or 5 times, go through the CT scan again, and like, it was pretty inaccurate in our, as engineers, in our opinion, just saying like, okay, this is 45 degrees, we're going in.
Which also brings
Yeah.
up CT scans have like so much more radiation than X-rays, like I think more than 100 times. So that's also like I guess a sub problem of doing like this procedure, because you're exposing patients to unnecessary radiation.
Is that a sub problem or just an overall problem?
I think that's an overall problem in
I think the issue with
radiology.
CT itself.
Yeah,
Radiology.
yeah, but see how we're talking about different problems and different levels?
Yeah.
You guys are seeing that?
Yeah.
So problem would be overall CT radiation, right? And I understand what you're saying in this specific condition
Right.
too, but.
Is there a way you could segment your problem list? Because it already sounds like there's 2 big buckets sort of falling together.
Yes.
Like there's, I missed this gentleman's name.
Sean?
Sean.
Yeah.
You started with clinical
Right.
based issues, patient based. So I think of infection,
Right.
as a big concern on a CT, or wrong puncture or patient pain. But as I heard the conversation here a little further, going to more operational issues. So you almost have like 2 little buckets. So, you could start creating buckets and then sort of start finding out where is the bigger pain of the area.
No, absolutely. So I guess what I wanted to show is just how really quickly you could get a bunch of different problems, but they don't necessarily have any kind of quantifiable outcome, and they're not necessarily a great they're not a need statement yet, right?
Right.
So to John's point, maybe what we could do is pick, one of these if it's more clinically based, or the operations, to do one need statement together on. So does anyone have a preference? Because whoever does is going to help me walk through this example too.
I really like the, sorry, I was gonna say, I really like the lumbar puncture issue.
Yep, okay.
But, sorry, what were you gonna say?
No, I was gonna say that I think the needle location is like easier to make a statement from.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go with that one. So really, the problem is what here though? Because there's multiple factors going on, and normally you want to isolate the single most important factor in your need statement, what you're going after. So
I would just say inconvenient, the inconvenience doing an invasive procedure to collect CSF.
Okay.
Huh? Inconvenience to both the patient, I guess to both the patient and doctor to collect CSF pressure, like, I guess that number.
And if the patient moves, did they have to redo the
They have to
CT scan?
I mean, like, it's like an ongoing CT kind of thing, so they kind of like reposition it, but yeah, it's a pain, because they have to, do that stuff.
So, I didn't mention this yet, but most need statements start out as a better way, and then that way you're automatically not assuming kind of a set solution or a certain way of doing it. So could you just repeat one more time what?
I guess the problem is a better way to collect,
measure
or
fluid
to
pressure.
to measure CSF fluid, that's what she said. To measure CSF, yeah.
CSF pressure, and what would be what's the problem we're solving, or the quantifiable outcome?
Without the inconvenience of an invasive procedure.
The visit.
Okay. And someone who hasn't spoken lately, can you give some feedback on this need statement?
An inconvenience is hard to measure.
It's built around a negative.
And also, like, why do they have to measure the CSF pressure? What is like the underlying problem of that?
Because I guess if you have an elevated CSF pressure, it could be indicative of like other health problems.
You give it like blood pressure.
Yeah, okay, that's different.
And I'm questioning, like, do we have to measure it, or is there like a better way to get the same results without measuring the CSF pressure?
I mean,
like to make it broader.
I feel like the fact that they did measure it was like, I mean, I could go find out like what
But yeah, I see what you're saying though, because it could be, I mean, maybe it's just a tap on the ear, and do you know what I mean? Like, why cerebral spinal fluid for the measurement in that procedure?
Right, I have to go back and like ask him, but it seemed like something about it was important. Like if you store too much CSF in the brain, it's like
They're looking for swelling in those areas in particular, or infection.
So maybe a better way to characterize brain health?
Sure, let's write it.
Right, spinal cord. I think it's
So you scoped it way up, which I like that. Do you want to have any quantifiable outcome in there? So a better way to. And I'm letting this go for discussion purposes, right? Because there's all sorts of ways these things can go.
And so they require the CT scan just to place the barometer. So that means that if you didn't use the barometer but used non-invasive way that didn't even need to like shove a needle through the skin, you wouldn't even need a CT scan.
Yeah,
so maybe
how
a
you do it, yeah.
quantifiable outcome would be without using radiation or removing radiation. As a better way to characterize brain or to measure CSF without exposing the patient to radiation somehow. If you were, I don't know how you access it exactly.
My opinion, and this is just my personal opinion, but it sounds as if radiation isn't the key concern and the key pain point.
But then you need to use the CT scan too, because basically trying to, like if you can measure the pressure without using the CT scan, you free up the CT scan for another patient. It requires a lot less time. Like it would be very broad and very challenging to find a solution to that problem, I guess. But if you could get rid of the CT scan as a whole. That's
yeah, a lumbar puncture is resource intensive for something small.
It takes a while.
Yeah, so it takes up doctor's time, it takes up the resources, and it takes like the CT scanner, and it takes up a slot in like their patient that they can see. So
maybe focus on the time piece.
Time, well, like what he said, like you freeing up the CT scanner for so another patient can use it too is also an issue.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah.
Like, the overwhelm was resources, but I'm not sure which of those is. Like,
So, yeah. Hopefully, you see this whole point of the exercise is that it's difficult. I don't have a good.
We don't have enough information now,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
What are we trying to diagnose? Maybe we're trying to reduce the time it takes to diagnose a brain bleed.
Right.
We don't actually have that.
And I'm really appreciate that you have the courage to share this because it's not easy, right? That's the whole thing. You're like, I was only there for so long, and there's so many things, there's so many bells going off, and whatever. But that's the information that we have to deal with, right? And how you're gonna be justifying to your teammates about, what is good and what isn't. But I guess I'm not trying to offer you like some solution, this is how you do it. It's like, this is the process that we have to go through. Go ahead.
I think that's one also of the thing that came out of my clinical observation was that it's really important to try to do a lot of them and in different environments, because it's hard to know exactly what's wrong or what's the problem by only observing once, because it can be very hospital specific. Like their CT scan just is a 20-year-old CT scan and it doesn't do things that recent CT scans do. So you find a problem and then you realize going to another hospital, oh, they got their CT scan last year. It does all those amazing things already and solves all the problems I found for the other hospital. So I think it's very important to try to be consistent. And that's why I think like sticking maybe to one department is a good idea, because the only way to really find the problems is to spend a lot of time seeing the same thing done multiple times in multiple places and by different people. Because otherwise we're going to find problems, but it's really hard to know whether they're actual problems or they're really location or person specific.
I really like that, and to your last point that it could be person specific. I've seen some doctors that are, don't go by what the doctors are necessarily telling you they need or they have to have. I mean, that's just how they see things, right? They may not see the bigger picture around it because they've been doing it for so long. So, I completely would reiterate what you just said about how it does take enough observation, both for yourself, but also observation with other team members. So that's why, or pairs for now. We'll get there, but that way you have multiple sets of eyes on it and can revalidate it in ideally different healthcare settings too. Okay? So I guess what we'll do next week is I'll give you some examples of needs that I've actually worked on to show you, hey, this is where they were at when we didn't fully, they were half-baked, and then how we kind of worked them out, and then how we got to a really good need statement. So that way I'm not just leaving you dry. So, and
how long does that take you to really get to a decent need statement?
So there's a reason why we're trying to do almost 2 months of clinical immersion. So 10 weeks, 8 weeks or so. So 6 to 8 weeks, and it's normally the hardest is when you get to the very top. Maybe like I'm gonna have each of your teams have like a top 4 or 5 needs, and I'll teach you the tools and techniques to get it from 100 needs. I want you guys ideally to have 100 or 50. I have to get the numbers right depending on kind of where we're at in the process, but basically how you go from a lot to a little. So how you get down to the top 4 or 5 needs. That's when you need almost a whole month to do the diligence just on those top needs, so that you get down to the very top one, and then that's when you start brainstorming. So that would be like the probably November timeframe or so, mid-October, November timeframe. So I don't know if I really answered your question there, but it definitely takes a lot longer when you're that much kind of deeper in the diligence with the needs.
So a question I have is to kind of juxtapose these two, talking about how it's important to maybe stick with it and dive deeper and really focus. And I think with Sean's point, we maybe didn't understand why we want the CSF pressure, even though we identified it as a problem, until just by happen chance we talked about it today. And so now you can go back and iterate and dive deeper and know more about the true problem.
Right.
So my question is it better to scatter horizontally and get a bunch of needs problems, or is it better to kind of maybe discuss just a handful, and because we don't know to dive deeper unless we kind of chew on it.
Yeah, it is a balance. My training is do your best to, once you can write a need statement pretty quickly, because the more you write need statements, the sooner you can go from a problem to a halfway decent need statement. And my preference is to have a number of different need statements, and you can rattle through pretty quickly, like, okay, maybe this isn't a clinical need, or maybe the market is too small. The whole idea is you want to have a lot so that you can literally kill these needs, just say no, 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 and then you get to your top ones. Alright, yeah.
I think if I could help with that, working on some projects where you're trying to sell something. I mean, I'll just give you a crude example. At some point 2 years ago, we're looking at doing rapid diagnostics for malaria, and we had a way that you can do it really quickly. But now you have to write a proposal, you want money. So how do you tell somebody, hey, we can do this? So that's where I think this is quite analogous to that. And I wish I read this book back then because I was reading over the weekend, and it goes through the steps. You look at statistics, epidemiology, costs, markets, and to answer his question in some, in a vague way, I would say you have to dig deep, because when you make this need statement, you need to do your due diligence. You need to say that these are the numbers. Radiation exposure, why is it important? It's not a good thing, why don't they like it? And those things will kind of reflect in the statement. So we definitely have to dig deeper, look more, and the book has some nice, I think they have these 5 or 6 things they've said, epidemiology, cost, market, and there are a few others which we could follow.
And I'll definitely, thank you, I'll definitely teach that. We'll actually have specialized, somewhat proprietary docs that we'll give you that will allow you to put your need statements in an Excel doc, and you'll be able to rank them depending on the impact, the patient impact, size of the market, cutting the cost out of the system, really important drivers. So that will also, besides the fact of just killing them, because that's just not a need, you can go through that. There's basically 3 different layers that will apply of somewhat proprietary features of how to get down to the top needs. Okay. All right. I think it'd be really interesting that if, when you're in the clinic this week, if anyone sees similar procedures, it can kind of cue in some of their thoughts, and maybe we can at least try to address a part of that problem in one kind of more succinct need too next week. All right. For your assignment, let's see. Do you think each of you can try to do, unless it's a special circumstance, 2 different immersion sessions from now until next week? Yeah? Okay.
There's enough afternoon slots for
Okay.
everybody.
All right. Well, let's try to do that, and then I may think through if there's anything else. Gaurav, can you think of anything that would be helpful with other assignments? I think just making sure you've gone through the need statements 1.3 really well, and maybe if you want to go on Biodesign YouTube, they also have other need statement development videos. If you can also watch those to build on this.
And we'll try to make the scheduling a little easier in the next next week or so.
Yeah.
We'll get everything set up, the Google Suite and everything, and
yeah,
we'll be a little bit more smoother after that. We'll have all the slide decks available, and yeah.
Any other questions, comments? Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna ask. There was a time where I saw there was 2 people taken. Like, is it? And I saw like Monday or Tuesday someone did 3 people.
It didn't seem to mind.
Yeah. Okay. Just because it works. I mean, I'm dying to get my second
There
one.
weren't that many spots that have worked out on the first day, and we have the same schedule.
Okay.
I repeat,